Because CBU feels that other great reforms in Africa have to wait until the problem of malaria is dealt with, we advocate the United States federal government should substantially increase. Because CBU feels that other great reforms in Africa have to wait until the problem of malaria is dealt with, we advocate the United States federal government should substantially increase assistance to the Greater Horn of Africa in the area of public health. We begin with observation 1, status quo. A. Current malaria conditions are devastating in the continent of Africa. From Nothing But Nets, 2006. Malaria infects more than 500 million people a year and kills more than 1 million. One person dies about every 30 seconds. The disease is particularly devastating in Africa, where it is a leading killer of children. In addition to being home to the deadliest strain of malaria and the mosquito best equipped to transmit the disease, many areas in Africa lack the proper infrastructure and resources to fight back. The disease is a self-perpetuating problem with large-scale impact on societies and economies. Malaria accounts for up to half of all hospital admissions and outpatient visits in Africa. In addition to the burden on the health system, malaria illness and death cost Africa approximately $12 billion a year in lost productivity. The effects permeate almost every sector. Malaria increases school absenteeism, decreases tourism, inhibits foreign investment, and even affects the types of crops that are grown. 90% of those who die are African children. Malaria incapacitates people, keeping countries poor. B. Current malaria programs are worse than the AIDS epidemic. From Nullis, 2007. Malaria far outstrips AIDS as the continent's biggest child killer. The malaria toll is numbing, between 300 million and 500 million cases and 1 million deaths each year. In some African countries, it accounts for up to half of all hospital admissions. Its economic cost is an estimated $12 billion per year. C. DDT, a known anti-malarial measure, is banned from use. From Harrison, 96. The use of DDT increased enormously on a worldwide basis after World War II, primarily because of its effectiveness against the mosquito that spreads malaria and lice that carry typhus. The use of DDT was banned in the United States in 1973, although it is still in use in some other parts of the world. The buildup of DDT in natural waters is a reversible process. The EPA reported a 90% reduction of DDT in Lake Michigan fish by 1978 as a result of the ban. D. DDT has been falsely demonized. From Schlafly, 2005. In 1962, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, created a worldwide scare about DDT, which she claimed was a danger to wildlife. Much of her so-called scientific basis for DDT ban was soon proven either wrong or exaggerated, and the 1972 edition of her book admitted as much. No study has ever been able to link the use of DDT with any negative human health impact, even though sprayers have worked with the chemical many hours a day. Nevertheless, contrary to expert testimony that DDT was not harmful to humans, animals, or the environment, in a raw exercise of arbitrary power in 1972, the Environmental Protection Agency banned DDT, and it has continued to be banned in most of the world. Since then, more than 50 million people have died from malaria. Observation 2, Plank. Plank 1. The United States Congress will pass laws that 1. Lift the ban on imports grown using DDT. 2. Provide funds for the training and assignment of indigenous African teams to perform indoor residual spraying and distribute artemisinin-based combination therapies known as ACTs, bed nets, and DDT production and shipping. Funding amounts will be $100 million. The plan will be funded by taking money from the defense budget, which was over $543 billion in the year 2006. The plan will be enforced by the United States Departments of State and Agriculture. Observation 3, solvency. A. DDT is the most cost-effective way of preventing malaria. From Dressen, 2007. The WHO reinstituted DDT use for malaria control because it recognized that no other chemical, indeed no other invention of any kind, did so much for so long at so little cost. Sprayed in small amounts on the walls of wattle or cinder block houses, it repels mosquitoes, keeps the few that do enter from biting, and kills any that land for up to a year. Some within WHO are unhappy with this policy change, but it is supported by science. WHO health directors and the Stockholm Convention, which specifically permits DDT for disease control and not only in emergencies, until equally effective alternatives are readily available. Thus far, there are none. Decades of research have found no proof that DDT directly harms human health, says Donald Roberts, a professor of tropical health who is one of the world's foremost authorities on malaria and DDT. Some studies have found possible links between DDT and various minor health issues. Others have found no such connections. There is extensive evidence, however, that DDT reduces disease and saves lives, Mr. Roberts emphasizes. Unfortunately, Pesticide Action Network is so focused on speculative risks of using DDT that it ignores the horrific dangers the chemical prevents. B. Indoor residual spraying can help gain an advantage over mosquitoes. From Nothing But Nets, 2006. Sometimes specialized teams are organized to spray on inside walls of houses, a process known as indoor residual spraying, or IRS. IRS kills female mosquitoes when they rest on sprayed surfaces after feeding on a person, reducing malaria transmission to others. Only female mosquitoes can transmit malaria. In special circumstances, teams are also organized to eliminate or treat mosquito breeding sites with another type of environmentally friendly pesticide. C. Anti-malarial drugs protect pregnant women and their babies. From Nothing But Nets, 2006. ACTs are the most effective drugs currently available for treating malaria. ACT combination therapies are also used to help pregnant women by administering at least 2 monthly treatment doses of SP. During the second and third trimesters of their pregnancy, more than 70% of pregnant women in Africa attend prenatal clinics at least once during their pregnancy. A regime of SP helps protect pregnant women from possible death and anemia and also prevents malaria-related low birth weight in infants, which causes about 100,000 infant deaths annually in Africa. D. Bed nets are a cost-effective way to protect Africans from malaria, from Nothing But Nets, 2006. Despite the magnitude of the problem, there is a simple and cost-effective solution to prevent malaria deaths. For just $10, we can purchase a bed net, deliver it to a family, and explain its use. Bed nets work by creating a protective barrier against mosquitoes at night, when the vast majority of transmissions occur. A family of 4 can sleep under an insecticide-treated bed net safe from malaria for up to 4 years. The benefits of the bed nets extend even further than the family. When enough nets are used, the insecticide used to deter mosquitoes makes entire communities safer, including even those individuals who do not have nets. Although $10 for a bed net may not sound like much, the cost makes them out of reach for most people at risk from malaria, many of whom survive on less than $1 a day. Nets are a simple, life-saving solution, but we need your help to provide them to those in need. I now stand open for cross-examination.
Anybody, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. There you go. Okay.
Why do you need to lift the ban on imports grown using DDT?
Currently, there's a stigma about importing things that are used with DDT. It prevents them from growing crops that have DDT on them because they can't sell them. If we lift the ban,
how is that assistance to them? Isn't that just lifting a ban?
Well, let me finish what I'm saying. If we lift the ban, they'll be able to sell those crops to other countries and therefore
so
have a profit.
That would be economics. That would be economic development, right? They get to now grow and sell and engage in trade.
But we're not just lifting the ban on ones that are sold, we're lifting the ban on the ability to use DDT to grow.
Well, but when you're talking about the imports, you're only talking about changing the economic situation, right? Wouldn't that be engaging in economic development?
No, because they don't use DDT currently because of that.
And then they now get to use DDT and get to export those those things grown in the United States, right?
Economic benefits are additional to the health, but we're doing
But
that
you
so
admit
that
they exist.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. I need it. Let's go ahead and go to plan 2 then. The plan will be funded by taking how much money from the defense budget?
$100 million. That's like one fighter jet.
Okay.
Not even a full fighter jet.
Okay. 100. From the state and agriculture. Does the U.S. Department of State and Agriculture have the capacity to send foreign aid?
Well,
Have they ever done that previously?
Department of State's done it plenty of times. And they do it currently in Iraq. They send foreign aid to people all the time. That's what the Department of State does.
And is that currently happening in the public health in Africa?
Well, we're instituting a new policy, so it wouldn't be currently happening now.
So you're extending the State Department into Africa, right? Like the State Department is now engaging in public health assistance in
All
Africa.
the State Department is doing, if you look at the plan, we're training indigenous personnel to do it. We're not sending our troops down there to do anything. We're just allowing them to use this thing. We're training them how to do it so it...
And you give them the money to be able to do it physically?
We give them the money, we use money to train them, and then we give them the money to have the ability to do it, yes.
What's the timer?
30 seconds left.
Okay. Your first card, the Solvency A card, talks about there's been some studies that talk about possible effects. Can you elaborate on that? Like possible negative effects?
There have been anything from you can get the flu to it, to you can get to the eggs are softened in birds. There's all kinds of things, but it's those studies have been proven false. So.
Have those?
Right. Would you like to use any prep?
Yes. Off, case off. 2 off, case.
Potentially 3.
Okay.
Just make sure I get 6.
6 minutes? Or 7 minutes?
He's got 7 minutes.
You got 7.
Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
First is going to be a topicality on 1. The 8 point is the definition. 1, a grammatical word from the Encarta English World Dictionary in 99. A grammatical word indicating a single thing or unit, not two or more. That not means it's exclusive. The B point is the violation. Nothing but nets in 06. It's his first card that he reads, talks about how this impacts out to tourism, but also his plan blank 1 talks about lifting an economic ban, which means that he's dealing both in economics, even if it's just effectually that way, he's affecting economics and public health, which was stated, which is more than 1. The C point is the standards. My first is extra topicality. I argue that he gets way more ground because of this, able to garner extra impacts, which means he violates competitive equity and ruins the entire point of the debate. But also, secondly, I'd like to argue limits. I argue that you functionally add another permutation to the entire resolution, which means you take a possible 20 cases or a possible 30 cases, which is already large, and turn it into 60 or 80, which means the research burden becomes impossible. But that also impacts out to shutting out small schools because they don't have the research capacity to be able to engage in all of those cases. Therefore, the D point is the voter. First, I cross-apply the small schools analysis, but secondly, I argue that this is just fundamentally a rule. If you want the website for the NFA-LD website, then vote there. Let's go ahead and go to the next law. Funding specification. The 8 point is the violation. He fundamentally violates normal means. Defense spending isn't normal means for Department of funding aid. I argue that he changes what that normal means is. The B point is the reasons you prefer this. My first is just ground. I argue that he chose to spike out of negative ground by engaging in something outside of normative means, which means that when he no links out of any of the disadvantages, that proves the in-round abuse. But secondly, I argue this violates predictability because I'm no longer able to engage in the debate. You can always find a funding source outside of what's normal means, which spikes out of any type of argumentation. The C point is the voters. I argue vote on in-round abuse as it is predominant and is quantifiable within the round. Let's go ahead and go to case. Go to his C and D point on harms. It only talks about wildlife. This isn't talking, don't let him extend this and have him say it talks about public health also. It only talks about wildlife. Let's go ahead and go to the solvency. I think the only card I need here is the first card that he talks about. I think this is going to become the advantage to the counterclaim because you no longer need to use DDT, even with possible ones, right? Like if there's studies on both sides, that means that it's potentially going to cause harms. But I think also I'm just going to give you the cards that says it. So my second argument is women get breast cancer from DDT from Conan in 2007. Women heavily exposed to pesticide DDT during childhood are 5 times as likely to develop breast cancer, a new scientific study suggests. The UC Berkeley research provided the first evidence of a substantial effect on breast cancer. And my second card, Second card, young women are the greatest risk, Conan 2007. There was a very broad exposure to the pesticide, and with this study, we have evidence that women exposed when young are most affected. Finally, third, DDT is expensive. Stone in 2006. And spraying is costly. Any comprehensive nationwide spraying effort would have to reach some 4 million huts, costing more than 80 million. That's only for the first several rounds of spraying. So it's really expensive. Cool, and I think you can cross-apply the 100 million. On the rest of the solvency cards, I think you can group these. These are all going to become advantages to the counterplan, but they also don't disprove it. So let's go ahead and go to the first disadvantage. One, uniqueness. China and America are competing now from the Seattle Times in 2007. There is a recognition that China has a rising influence. There needs to be an understanding of what the U.S. role is and what the Chinese role is. The Bush administration has sharply increased aid to Africa over the past several years, particularly to combat AIDS. China's charm offensive in Africa is a second to none. They've done a lot of stuff in Africa. They don't see Africa as a burden. They are very tired and very hard. I think that's why they're winning friends in Africa. The second is the link. Their plan gives U.S. more power in Africa, specifically by extending the state, the State Department control. I think that generates the uniqueness. This is from Gentleman in 06. The actual ability of the U.S. to influence circumstances on the ground has been declining dramatically. When the Cold War ended, despite all complaints about fickle Cold War African policy, the United States was at least paying attention to Africa. It is a more competitive playing field, which gives the greater influence to African leaders as well as potential combaters or balancers of U.S. diplomatic leverage. It is not just China. This dilutes somewhat the U.S. ability to call the shots, define the agenda, and mobilize coherent action. The third is the internal link. Aid programs are critical to Chinese soft power. Boston Globe in 07. China's aid programs have been critical to its charm offensive in Africa. For almost nothing a decade ago, the country has emerged to probably one of the 5 biggest donors to the continent. And at Summit last month, Chinese leader announced to the world a $20 billion in new financing. China's aid explicitly goes to the programs to soften its image, while the United States has created fortress-like embassies and retreated behind or from public diplomacy. Therefore, the impact. Chinese hard power is bad. Stallbeck in 2006. China has used military force several times since the Korean War, including operations in the Spratly Islands in Vietnam. These actions were taken to defend freedom or to adjust social injustice. Rather, they were taken to settle differences with the country's regional neighbors. Although the U.S. welcomes the opportunity to work with competitive world partners, it cannot blindly ignore the competitors' preparedness for armed conflict and create hostile anti-Western global allies. China is trying to expand its influence in the world at the expense of the U.S. Therefore, the counterplan. Text. Canada will do the plan text, excluding obviously Plan Plank 1 because it can't happen, but also the $100 million for DDT. We're only going to use BTI scores, which I'll give you the solvency for later. The B point is this is obviously non-topical because the counterplan captures all the benefits of the case. However, we don't use the United States, but furthermore, the counterplan demonstrates an opportunity cost to the affirmative. Furthermore, Canada does not have to have any budget trade-off, which means I'm getting a net surplus because Canada has a budget surplus, started in 2007. It seems fairly likely that for the 10th consecutive year, the federal government will run a healthy surplus. After 10 years of surpluses, we can start thinking of other priorities. Also, I argue that we get more solvency from other solvency cards. Also, by switching to BTI, we get better solvency because the plan kills mosquitoes without killing babies and causing cancer, Morris in 01. All mosquitoes start their lives in water, and with the young hatching from eggs into what is now known as the Walbro wriggler stage, they move through the water, filtering out food as they go. When BTI is placed in the environment, mosquitoes eat it. The BTI spores, which contain crystallized toxin, are released from the mosquito stomach fluids, and the toxin ruptures the stomachs of the mosquitoes, causing death. 2. Babies don't die from it, from the EPA in 98. However, the toxicology of the active ingredient indicates that there will be minimal to non-existent risk to children present from the sites. 30 years of widespread use have produced no confirmed reports on the immediate or delayed allergenic reaction despite the significant oral, dural, and inhalation exposure to the microbial product. That means you don't kill babies, you still get all advantages of case, and you avoid the disadvantage with China. I'm now moving for questions.
All right, so just some clarifications.
Sure.
Your counterplan is basically saying you want to do the plan with BTIs instead of DDT, and you want Canada to do it.
Oh yeah.
Okay. In your harms, can I please see your cards about DDT being expensive and women getting breast cancer?
Sure.
And can I get my case back?
Sure. Okay. DDT expensive is on the 4th page, and I'll go ahead and set it at the 2 cards.
Oh, you have them there? I might have a copy. Let's see if we have the same. Right.
You can do that, but I don't have anything right now.
Okay.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And of course you can, sorry.
Oh, thanks. That's all the questions I have. I'll take some prep time.
Right.
Thank you. Is that he talks about how I'm removing that economic ban. Yes, I am, but he ignores kind of what I said in cross-X. I said the reason they're not using DDT, the reason they haven't been using it, the reason we haven't been giving it to them is because they're not willing to, because they wouldn't be able to export their crops. I'm not giving them an economic benefit. All I am doing is allowing them to use this DDT. If that's an independent advantage he wants to grant to me, I thank him for it, but I never claimed that in my case. So I stay within my topic of public health. Everything I claim is within public health. So his idea that I claim more advantages from having this economic thing falls flat because I don't use that at all. He's the first one to bring it up. The next thing he says is it violates small schools. Well, I don't know what he considers a small school, but I go to a small private school with less than 3,000 students. So I don't know where he's getting that the research is harder because I was able to do this on my own. So I don't know, see, so that kind of falls apart. And he's trying to tell you that it doesn't stick within it, but I show you that by this simple thing of removing this economic ban, which is part of my plan, just to allow them the will to use it, I don't claim any advantage from that except that they use the DDT. So just dismiss the topicality argument. With that, we'll move on to the funding argument he brings up. He says it's not normal means. All right, well, it's normal within the American government to redirect funds anytime we see fit. Hence why the war in Iraq took money from just about everything else when it needed it. So that's the way our government works. If as the government I decide that I want to take $100 million from one jet plane of the United States Coast Guard or the anything, then I have the right to do that and fund this program. So that argument falls flat. Moving on to harms. He says point C discusses animals. That's fine. Last time I checked, humans were animals, but, you know, that's your deal. Moving on to harms, he says, women get breast cancer. Okay, I'd like to point out the first thing this card says is women are 5 times more likely to get breast cancer. Now, I'm not saying cancer is good, but it doesn't say they will get breast cancer. It says they're more likely to get breast cancer. I'd also like to point out that they currently are getting malaria. They aren't likely to get malaria. 500 million people a year are getting malaria. A person dies every 30 seconds from malaria. Now, if I can stop that, then this breast cancer possibility is automatically outweighed. Also, I'd like to point out, I've got a couple cards. DDT less likely to cause cancer than cigarettes. African News, 06. It is now known that DDT is far less harmful than tobacco. Even someone else smoking cigarettes in our presence is more harmful than DDT. Another card. How about this? DDT is as dangerous as coffee, beer, and peanut butter. From Medical News Today, 2006. DDT is known as to be minimally toxic to humans and is classified as a possible human carcinogen, along with coffee, beer, peanut butter, and a host of everyday comestibles by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. DDT is exempted from public health use in the Stockholm Treaty on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Basically saying, look, yes, it's potential, but unless you stop eating peanut butter, drinking coffee, having beer, like, these are just, it's along those lines. I don't see anyone rallying to stop people from eating peanut butter. You know what I'm saying? So it's not a viable thing. Also, this one, studies showing links from DDT to cancer are flawed, from Medical News Today, 2006. The research is the latest in a long line of studies that have attempted to find associations between DDT and its metabolite like DDE and harm to human health. In the past several decades, innumerable studies have examined DDT's toxicity and claimed links between DDT and human cancer, reduced maternal lactation, prenatal birth, low birth weight, and endocrine disruption. The overwhelming majority of these studies have not been successfully replicated and ultimately failed to demonstrate any potential human harm. So through all those, you can see that cancer argument falls flat. He says DDT is expensive. I'd like to point out that he was not using DDT in that example. He skipped over the word, but he was using a different drug. And if my evidence has shown, I've got several cards, and I've read them to you, that nothing is as cheap or as effective as DDT. He was using another drug. It may be similar to DDT, but it's, by my evidence, DDT is the cheapest. So I can infer that mine would be done within my amount of money. His drug, I'm sorry it was too expensive. I wish it hadn't been, but mine isn't. That drug was. Moving on to the counter plan. Basically, he says there are problems with the U.S. being in there. He wants another power to go in there because it will annoy China. Look, if China's so annoyed and that we have to have Canada help us out, first of all, there's a problem there, but I'd like to just perm his plan. Like, so he wants everything I want. He's arguing for the resolution. So I can totally perm his plan and just say, look, if Canada would be willing to help us out and add their drugs to ours, cool, because I have evidence that says DDT is not harmful at all. If we can stop the mosquitoes on another level as well, awesome. That just helps me out further. He also agrees with the idea that we should help out these people any way possible. I'd like to also point out that this is a PIC, a plan-inclusive counter plan, and should be disregarded on that basis because he does not have a counter plan that is independent of this one. In fact, it is kind of dependent on this one occurring for that one to be necessary. So, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. He tries to get up here and say that China's going to be annoyed with the U.S. doing anything. Like I said, if they're so annoyed, have them help us. We can say, you've been there longer. We're finally realizing we should help out the Greater Horn of Africa. Let them hear that they were right first. China's going to be happy if we go on the world and say, yeah, China was right first. We're now helping them. So that's cool. I turn that and say it's now an advantage because we are now saying, China, you were right, we were wrong. We respect you enough to admit that. And with that, I say it's his turn.
All right. You have 2 minutes, 30 seconds left.
The one topicality, case, counter plan, China, and an underview. Funding specification, cool. There you go. No offense, no vote there. Let's go ahead and go to the one topicality. This is incredibly problematic for him. His we meet simply doesn't get him into this, right? I tell you on the violation level that even if I prove that he effectually meets that other burden, that's still a reason to vote because it still would allow him to get extra advantages, even if he doesn't get that extra advantage, right? Like none of my voters were dependent upon actual in-round abuse. His only real response is that he doesn't claim any advantages off of it, which I tell you doesn't matter because his case sets a precedent that would allow individuals to, but I also say that that's just a standard. You still vote on it even if he violates because the rules say that you should be voting on it, right? If he's more than one, then the rules say you need to vote him down in order to like support that, which he doesn't argue against, which means that even if he completely wins the extra topicality standard, you still vote against him because the violation is still true. But even on top of that, he's wholesale not responsive to the limits argumentation. So even if I lose the extra topicality, I still win the limits debate. I argue that allowing for you to affect multiple other areas increases the number of cases physically by simply adding another layer of permutations to it, which means you get 16 more cases. His only response is that he's from Cal Baptist, which is a small school. Cool. If you vote for him, you hurt him in the long run, right? You make it nearly impossible because now instead of having 20 cases, we've got 60 cases to research, and not only does that ruin my life, and I don't get to go out on Friday, but neither does he, which means that that's equally as bad for both of us. But even if you don't buy the small school analysis, I still win the standard that you want to decrease limits in order to engage the debate. So let's go ahead and go to case. Harms, yeah, cool. Let's go ahead and go to solvency because that's obviously where the debate is. First, I want you to extend across the analysis that I give you off of his Solvency 1 card, right? I tell you that there is a plausibility that there is a causal relationship between DDT and some negative health effects. His own card presumes that there is evidence on both sides. Furthermore, I want you to extend across the Conan 07 cards, which tell you that there is a relationship. So at this point, you have individuals who are qualified saying both that there is a relationship and both that there isn't. That means that there is at least a plausibility that there is a health effect to DDT. But furthermore, even when you look at his own cards, his new cards that he puts out there specify that it is a possible carcinogen. BTI technology, so these spores that are different than DDT are not a carcinogen. That means that even if it is only as bad as tobacco smoking, it is still better, right? Like your mother tells you not to smoke tobacco, but just because smoking tobacco isn't as bad as sucking in uranium doesn't justify sucking in tobacco smoke, right? DDT is possibly a carcinogen. BTI is not possibly a carcinogen, which means you always prefer the counterclaim because we're not spraying people with something that's a carcinogen. Do I need those new cards? No, I think that's good enough. I think I have cards on both sides. I think I have enough there. On the expensive stuff, cool. I paid for it with the counterclaim. Let's go ahead and go to counterclaim. First on the permutation. First off, he's still spraying people with DDT, which means I generated a net benefit to the counterclaim, right? You have a plausibility of a carcinogen effect. I argue that even one death at this point, even a 1% chance that it causes a case of it, even just a small case of it because of some genetic fluke, is enough of a reason to use BTI spores instead of DDT. But secondly, he doesn't argue the disadvantage, which means that I get 100% solvency and the net benefit to the counterclaim becomes the disadvantage because Canada equally solves for this. But furthermore, the permutation still doesn't solve because he encourages DDT use overall, which means I'm generating even more of a net benefit based off of his plan 1. On the PIC's disregard. My first argument is I'm not really a PIC, I'm more of an agent counterplan, and I think that that's the best way to test the competitiveness of the resolution, right? The resolution has the US federal government there. I think I should be able to test that. I think that's not only educational in the real world, because you should be deciding who should be doing it, but also shows the opportunity cost, which I want you to extend across the opportunity cost analysis that I already gave you. But secondly, I argue that even if it is a PIC, I don't think you need to disregard it because he doesn't justify or warrant out to you why you would need to justify or you warrant the PIC round. I think that that's perfectly educational. On the C point, or on the last one, that the China should help also. Okay, I know it's new and you're just going to have to weigh it against whatever he says. He just shifted his entire advocacy. His advocacy did not include talking to China or making a public statement that China was right? He then shifted coming into this last speech, which I have no way of extending out of outside of this independent voting and this line of argumentation, so you're just going to have to wait and possibly intervene. I argue that he fundamentally shifted his advocacy coming out of the MG. That muted my entire speech on the counterclaim because I I couldn't predict who he was going to pacify before I run the counterplan. But furthermore, I think that that's uniquely abusive within the context of the round because it's literally all of my offense, which means that you would functionally exclude me from the debate and destroy my ability to even engage. Which means, Danny, I quit debate and I no longer do LD, which means that all I do is partly because I think LD sucks, which means the activity dies because I'm a god and everybody will do it if I do it. That's enough of a reason to vote. On the counterplan, I think this is a pretty easy analysis, right? His plan makes China mad because the State Department, which currently isn't doing that, we established that in cross-ex, now extends their influence into the Greater Horn of Africa, which China wants, and aid is crucial to that. That's the internal link card. I argue that that means that China transitions from soft power into hard power, which is the impact. Hard power is always bad because they have a propensity literally to invade. That means that at their next excuse, China will use their hard power to assert their dominance because they see that their soft power isn't working. That's enough of a reason, even if you don't like the internal link, I think it's enough of a reason to vote for the counterplan, and you vote there.
Alright.
Can I have some prep time, please?
Okay, 1:15 left.
Thank you. I'm going to pretty much go line for line, but I'm going to try and give you, I know we don't call them voters, but, you know, voters. Just like that word. So, okay, starting with topicality, he gets up here and says, it doesn't matter if I claim that I got advantages, if they exist, I still lose. The problem with that is topicality is only supposed to be run if it has an impact on the debate itself. And as you can see, it has not. Because not once have we argued over economic issues in Africa. It has not come up at all within this round. Nor has he been without ground for argumentation, as I think is absolutely clear. So this topicality argument should be dropped immediately because he has plenty of ground and the issue never came up. It has no weight in the round whatsoever. Moving on to solvency. He says there are negative sides for negative side effects and my evidence admits that it's possible. Actually, what my evidence says is that studies are flawed when they try and link negative effects to, especially cancer, to DDT. Then I also point out that if they're there, they're only as dangerous as peanut butter. Finally, I have a card right here that risks of DDT are infinitely outweighed. As I pointed out, the millions of people dying would be worse than certain people getting cancer. But from Kusinga Boys, 2006, yes, there are risks in using DDT or other anti-malarial weapons for that matter, but the risk of not using them is infinitely greater. One-sided studies and news stories frighten people into not using the most effective weapon in our arsenal, and millions pay the ultimate price. That is unconscionable. He's arguing for an unconscionable thing, according to this evidence, that we simply allow people to die of malaria because they won't use the most effective thing. His thing may potentially be semi-effective, but my evidence says nothing is effective for as long a time and as cheap a price as DDT. You must vote for DDT. Then he gets up here and he tries to come up and say abusive shift by pacifying China. I would like to address this and say that was not my intent. I did not mean to come off as saying I'm including China. What I said was, in answer to his DA, that if that event arose, there is the potential for discussion with China. I did not claim them as part of my plan. My plan has never shifted except to perm his and include Canada as an agent of action. China is still independent of the U.S. I have not included them in my plan. That abuse does not exist. The DA could potentially have still been argued, but he did not. He dropped the DA, and it is not an inclusion of China, so drop the abuse. I did not shift my case one little bit. I said that that potential of discussion is there as it always is. I just pointed out the logical conclusion of two powers coming to a head in a thing they're competing in. Finally, the reasons you're going to vote for me. First of all, he doesn't solve for as much as I do. He gets up there and tries to claim that his little capsules of BTIs are going to kill mosquitoes, and that may be true. But I point out that nothing kills as well as DDT. Also, he never addresses my bed nets or my ACTs. He never claims the solvency that I'll gain from protecting babies from low birth weight. He never stops the village. He never has anything to say about the villages being protected by the bed nets. All of that still flows across. So even if you hate DDT, you still vote for the resolution because both of us.